Hello everyone and welcome back to the garden. Today we're going to be taking an updated look at growing zinnias. Now I do have one of these videos in the past already. I'll put a link to the card so you can find it if you're interested. It might have more details. I do these from year to year, and sometimes I remember certain facts, that might be helpful. Other times I forget. None of these videos are really scripted. I know a lot of people would prefer that, but I'm just, kind of go with the flow type of person. So hopefully this will be helpful. In this video, there's going to be footage from this season in which I grew a lot of these really gorgeous Floret and Dawn Creek varieties. They were so creamy and pastel, and they were truly something to behold when planted into these rows. And also it's going to contain some footage from the previous years where I've grown zinnias back at the old house with the garden. So getting right started, I like to winter sow zinnias. If you're unfamiliar with winter sowing, I have a video called The Complete Guide to Winter Sowing. I'll put it in the card here so you can check that out. Basically, I'm using these bottles as miniature greenhouses so that I can get a jump start on the season, usually sowing the seeds about 1 month before my last frost date. This system works totally great, no hardening off, no anything. And of course, you can do it on a larger scale, which I'm showing here, also in that video that I just mentioned. You can start them in trays in a low tunnel and have amazing results. Great, success with this. This has really been a game changer in terms of my ability to start a lot of seeds into trays outdoors, especially if you are like me and have very little space inside. As you can see, these seedlings, they look great. I've used both open trays and cell trays and gotten really great results. Once all chances of a frost have passed, I'm ready to prepare my beds. In this case, I'm using landscape fabric just laid out into each of the rows and transplanting in. The spacing on these is about 4 to 6 inches between each. That can vary, it's up to you, but I find that works very, very well for me. When these are transplanted, usually they transplant well, provided that they have not been allowed to get too big in the containers. If they get a little bit too big, I'll show you here in a second, you can have a bit of transplant shock, which is definitely not something you want. Once these do get into the ground, full sun, they're going to be growing great. But should you have the transplant shock issue, here's what it looks like. They are wilted. They're pretty much flat. Oh, they look bad. But rest assured, as long as you give them plenty of water and make sure they do not dry out during this process, they will perk back up. They are really resilient. You can handle them pretty rough when you transplant them and still have good results. So don't panic if they look a little bit bad, okay? Pinching will also be optional. As you can see, this one already branched before I was able to even pinch it. I personally do not pinch these just because my growing season is so long and they'll branch and get bushy on their own. So I usually don't bother, but you can. That will delay your first bloom just a few weeks, just something to keep in mind. But they do branch very, very nicely. Here in zone 6B/7, I'm just a bit south of Nashville, in case you were wondering about my growing zone. As you can see, these things go fast. You can generally kind of expect flowers about 6 to 8 weeks from planting. You do have the option of staking them. As you can see here, I've used a horizontal net to stake them. So in the past I have. Sometimes, for the most part, I don't really stake them these days. It's up to you. It depends a lot on your weather and the conditions in your yard. When I grew them in shaded beds, they needed staking because they got really tall. But now that I'm growing them in full sun, they don't need any staking because they just remain upright and looking gorgeous with very little, help from me or attention from me. And there have been cases where, a really strong storm will come through and, a small portion of the bed might get laid over. But for the most part, I haven't had too much trouble. Also, be on the look for powdery mildew. For powdery mildew. Leaf spot is also a problem. In both instances, there's things you can do, like increasing air circulation a bit and making sure that you have good seed that is healthy. But a lot of this simply isn't preventable, especially, depending upon the climate that you live in. Japanese beetles are also likely to be a problem if you live where those occur. They generally don't do enough damage to really worry about, but there are, of course, treatments. Hand picking them has really just proved best, whenever they've gotten out of control here in my yard. In terms of irrigation and things like that, I'm trying to think, I don't want to miss anything. These generally seem to get enough water just, through rainfall. But if you do live in a drier climate, you're going to have to think about making sure they get about an inch, per week. I think 1 inch of I think that's generally a good base guideline. In terms of fertilizer, again, since this is an annual, as long as my beds are nice and rich and I've amended them really, really well with compost, I don't really worry about, too much about added fertilizer throughout the growing season. Of course, if you want to, do those applications, make those applications to encourage bloom, promote bloom, I'm sure it wouldn't be a problem. Just make sure to avoid any kind of feeds with a nitrogen number that's, excessively high, because that will kind of put a damper on the flowers and more focus on green growth. Beyond that, I'm not quite sure what else to include. Their care is seriously simple. That's what makes them one of the best flowers to grow for cut flowers and for beginners. Of course, you can direct sow them directly into prepared beds. I didn't mention that back when we were starting the seeds, but I generally don't tend to do that just because a lot of the varieties I grow are these more expensive specialty types, like these floret zinnias. They're so expensive. There's no way that I'm going to risk, losing the seeds for those by direct sowing. Now that I've saved seeds for a couple of seasons, I feel more comfortable doing that. But if you have just, bulk packages or you want to grow for birds and things, direct sowing is always an option and can be really beautiful, especially if you're kind of working to establish an informal type wildflower type bed. Always a favorite among bees and butterflies and hummingbirds. Always love watching the hummingbirds late season. When these are producing seeds, the goldfinches will also be bouncing around in these beds, and I think it's really fun to watch them. That's really about it for this video. If you have any questions, just ask down below and I'll do my best to try to help. Sometimes I don't know the answers, so feel free to leave your experiences in your zone that you've had, because it often is helpful to other growers, and I think that's so cool that we can help each other just make some really beautiful growing spaces. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to watch this video. It really means a lot to me, and I'm so thankful. Without you guys, it seriously would not be possible for me to do this, to make videos, or to even grow flowers. So it genuinely means a lot to me. I hope that it is sunny and beautiful wherever you are. You totally deserve it, and don't you ever forget it. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.